they'll be doing a different class because they're reading books 3 and 4 for next week. They meet, but you don't meet, which I should start out with. Next week is break. One week. There's 1 week we don't meet. So this always causes consternation and controversy. I'm not sure why. We are taking 1 week off, so I will see you in 2 weeks. Because normally I would see you in 1 week. I don't know. I always get, because sometimes it's Ruth. It's like, are we meeting next week? No, Ruth. 1 week we're not taking off, and then the next week we will be here. I'm sorry to single you out. Anyway. So don't come to the Franiches next week. Because John will say, go away. We don't want you here. I don't know if he will actually say that or not. All right. You owe me papers. Let's see your paper. Oh, is there an ask me thing? Here, just a second. I need glasses. Excuse me, Edison. Yes.
So I think I may have forgotten to do that.
Oh, well, that would explain why I had trouble seeing it. That's fine. No, and sometimes I write things and I'm not correcting you so much as just saying, oh, this is a way to strengthen this. Do you know what I mean? I'm just giving you helpful, friendly advice. Because in these papers, we are trying to knock arguments down, right? In the short summas, I'm not necessarily saying you have to have a portion where you knock the argument down. But in these, I do. Okay. That's okay. It's a work in progress, right? We're getting better every time we do it. You have one very, very brief writing assignment over your break. And it is this. I would like you to write a summa, which is one paragraph, 250 to 300 words. And I would like you to answer this question. Which side do you think is more right, the patricians or the plebeians? Which side do you think is more right, the patricians or the plebeians? We've already probably are already sick of these two groups fighting each other, but wait, there's more. Book 3 is full of fighting, which we are going to talk about a lot today. But I feel like both sides make a good argument. If you can actually quote an argument from the book, awesome. But if not, just try to be each of those groups in your imagination. I've said this before, studying history is an imagination thing. What would it be like if I lived under those conditions? If I had this sort of ruler over me, if I worshiped that sort of gods, what would it be like? And so imagine, what if I am in the ruling class of Rome? I'm a senator. What's the downside of letting the masses just run amok and make whatever rules they want? What's the downside? What's the upside? Then imagine you're one of those running amok masses. You are sick and tired of those senators and those consuls pushing you around, trotting around with their fasces and beating you with rods and chopping your head off with an axe. Although after they've done that, you probably don't argue much. What would it be like to be that person, to be in that group? And then tell me if you think, and a couple of you asked when you did your essays, well, can I defend both sides? Can I say something good about both sides? I said, no, you have to defend one side. That's not true here. When you write about this, you can point out both sides have some right, maybe, and both sides have some wrong, which, you know what, is honestly true of most issues in the world. Some positions are just flat out wrong. But more often, it's like, well, I see your point, but, I argue this back.
So does this include when we did the normal
Yes, yes, which we're going to talk about today. That's all I want. You don't have to put anaphora and whatever the other thing is I'm having you do. Personification, unless you want to. And if you want to, bully for you, yay. But you don't have to, all right? And I also want you to finish Livy, read books 4 and 5. This will be double reading, but you have 2 weeks to do it. So it's just the same amount you've been doing. It's not extra, it's just read one book 1 week and the next book. But we're just going to discuss both weeks together when we come back together, okay? Our art of the week, it did not come out very well. It was not good resolution, so I only got a small one, and it's kind of creepy. I feel like I'm not a very good art. I also was like, it's kind of creepy. Look at his face. I'm going to pass this around just because you got to get a close-up look at this guy's face. This is the Apollo of Veii. So Veii is the town, you may remember, they keep arguing with. Rome and Veii are very close together, and they keep having wars. This was on the top of a temple. And so they call it the Apollo, but apparently the Etruscans had a god called Apullu. And they just, I don't know if it's because, oh, he seems like Apollo, or Apullu sounds a lot like Apollo, so let's just make him one person. I don't know if it actually is Apollo, because it's an Etruscan god. It was on the top of a temple with other, it was a, not diorama, because that's small. It was a several statues in a scene, acting out a scene, okay? And it was a scene of one of the labors of Hercules, because the Etruscans had heard of this through all those Greek people that lived in southern Italy. Anyway, take a look at the guy's, just interestingly, he still has a lot of paint on him. You know, sometimes we look at these statues and we just think they're very boring. They're all gray, you know, everything was gray or white if you were using some kind of nice marble. They were painted. Like their faces were all painted and their lips were red and their cheeks were rosy and their hair was painted. It was very, very bright and gaudy. So that guy still has some paint. Good for him. Anyway, I don't know why his eyes are really big and he looks like he's maybe had some Botox in his lips. Aren't they really fat? I'm sure, well, that obviously is the way it was made, but I just, you know, we had the Etruscan sarcophagus last week with the guy with the pointy chin and he looked like a centaur and his eyes were, I don't know. Maybe the Etruscans looked like that. I don't know. It strikes me as very odd. What? Pointy chins and fat lips? I don't know. Maybe that's why the other guy had a beard to hide his fat lips. The pointy beard. No, probably not. Unless you let the mustache grow like over your mouth, then you can't eat. Okay, sounds like Vikings to me or something. Okay. Where's my Livy? I got it out and read the bit about history being instructive to my junior high class because I thought it went along with what we were talking about. So book 3 starts out with just a boatload of fighting. For the first 10 pages or so, it just goes on and on and on. You do not have to remember everybody they're fighting with. Please don't worry, all right? It is enough to know that they are constantly at war with their neighbors and that there is a cycle. And that is the first question I asked you. What is the cycle that keeps being repeated in Roman politics? War. That's part of the cycle. What's the other part of the cycle? Because a cycle means it goes around in a circle. Sometimes they're at war, and what's happening when they're not at war? Civil war, right? We are either fighting an enemy or we're fighting each other. And it goes around in a cycle like this. We fight a war and then we have peace. And then we get focused on ourselves. And they start fighting, the patricians and the plebeians start fighting. And then an enemy comes because they say, oh, those Romans, they're all out of whack because they just fight with themselves, but they're fighting with each other. They won't put up a resistance. We can attack them. And then the patricians go to the plebeians and they say, please, oh, please sign up for the war because enemies are coming. And they reach some kind of agreement. Well, we want tribunes. We want this. We want that law passed. We're like, okay, whatever. Just sign up for war so we can fight the enemy. And then they fight, and then the whole thing happens over again. Livy described it. 192. In the course of these events, history was repeated, and the successful conclusion of a war was once again immediately followed by political disturbances. And then he repeats this again. It says, a dangerous clash was imminent. And he means clash between the patricians and plebeians. And only avoided by, would you believe it, a report from the Hernici that the Volscians and Aequians, in spite of their recent losses, were on the warpath again. The old cycle was being repeated. They just can't stay at peace. Do you think there's no way to answer this question because we're speculating, but think about the kind of people that started Rome. Of course, that was 300 years ago now. But do you think that a people group can be just, I don't know, what's sake, genetically disposed to, have their characters bent in such a way that they just want to fight all the time? Do you think some people are just warlike by nature? And by people, I don't mean individuals, I mean groups of people. I don't know how to answer that. I feel like it would not be a popular study nowadays. People are all kind of upset about, oh, I don't know, prejudice or labeling certain groups of people. But certain groups of people seem to be certain ways. They just do. I don't know are we supposed to ignore it? You know? I mean, I'm thinking of, because I'm reading about the Middle Ages now, getting ready for next year. Think about the Huns, Attila the Hun. The Huns came through and invaded. These guys just killed everything that was in their path, and they just did it over and over and over. Is it because they just had a certain disposition to want to do that? What do you think, Adrian? Mm-hmm. And so that's the question we don't understand. Is it because you're brought up a certain way that you do things? Or is it because you're naturally that way? Probably both. What do you think, Addison?
I think everyone's naturally sinful.
Yeah.
Also, if you're raised, like she said, if you're raised, it's just cycle after cycle of war and fighting. That's what you know. And so then you just continue that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Eventually it would take a very strong decision to get out of that. So if you were raising it by people who can do it, let's see, effort.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they started out that way. You know, we had Numa, the second king, who said, we're not going to be battling all the time. We're going to be religious. But in one lifetime, apparently it wasn't enough to, guys, it's just a little distracting when we have a conversation. It wasn't enough to break that fighting spirit, maybe. I don't know. But 300 years later, they seem to always want to be fighting somebody, whether it's an enemy or each other. But I guess I'm not using my imagination very well in that respect either. What would it be like to be one of those plebeians and feel like you're downtrodden? Maybe I'm not doing it, in other words, just because I want to fight with somebody. Maybe I really think I'm being given the shaft. What do you think, John?
Yeah, also, I'm supposed to say that, a lot of they probably enjoy it. So, I would say just stay there, the best of people.
Yeah. This is an unanswerable question. We haven't found the gene in people that makes you want to fight your neighbors. As far as we know, there is no fight your neighbors gene. But we do know people come with dispositions too. I mean, some of us are just naturally, some people are more hot-tempered than others. They just are more easygoing. I don't know. These guys seem hot-tempered to me because they just can't let it rest. And that's the cycle. So I asked you next. One of the tribunes, Arsa, Gaius Terentillus Arsa, he decided to propose a bill. And what did he propose? What did he think they should do? What did you put for that? Yeah. I want to cut the knees out from under the consuls, basically. I want to reduce their power. He said this to the people. Okay, on several successive days, he made inflammatory speeches. Inflammatory speeches to the mob, inveighing bitterly against the arrogance of the patricians as a whole, and more particularly against the excessive powers of the consuls, which he denounced as intolerable in a free community. Consul, he declared, might be a less hateful word than king. But in actual fact, consular government was even more oppressive than monarchy, in that the country had taken two masters in place of one, both of them men with irresponsible and unlimited powers, who without any sort of check upon themselves used the whole terror of the law, with all the penalties it sanctioned, for the crushing of the common people. These guys had the power of kings. They weren't like our president. Therefore, he said, it is my intention to propose a measure which will put a stop to this tyranny. 5 commissioners must be appointed to codify the laws which limit and define the power of the consuls. That done, the consuls will be bound to use against the people only the authority granted to them by popular assent, instead of giving the force of law, as they do at present, to their own arbitrary passions. Consuls could just make a rule, and it was binding, just like a king. And Arsa said, I don't like that. Because if you get good consuls, great. If you get bad ones, very, very bad. And so I think we should have it written down. What he wanted was a constitution. I want the powers limited and written down so everyone can look at them. Well, as you can guess, the consuls and the Senate don't like this one bit. To me, it seems like a very reasonable request. Does it seem reasonable to you? We live under a constitution. We live under laws that are written down. If it doesn't say the government can do it, the government can't do it. End. Abortion, case in point. They made a bad ruling 40 years ago. And I don't mean immoral. I mean bad. That is not a power delineated in the Constitution. It was supposed to be decided by the states. End of story. That's what it says. And they reversed it. Not necessarily because they think abortion is a immoral, but because it's not in the Constitution. It doesn't say that the federal government can do that, make laws concerning that. So this is what Arsa wants. But to the ruling class in Rome, it's like, this is the end of our power. These plebeians are unreasonable. And unless we can do whatever we need to do to whip them into shape or get an army, signed up, whatever we need to do, we're going down. We're going to lose all our power. So they fought it. They fought it tooth and nail. If you remember, page after page of, and they brought the measure up again and they squashed it. And they brought the measure up again and they squashed it. Tribune after tribune tries. every year to bring it up. And so at one point in the reading, I noticed, I highlighted it, it said it had been 35 years since the first tribunes were elected. In 35 years, they had gone from, yay, the people finally have a voice, to, you better give us what we want or else. The tribunes, very bold. You know, if I'm on the other side of the fence, these guys are getting scary because they can't be arrested. I mean, they can be for like theft or murder or something like that. They can't be arrested for political speech, you know, for what they're doing, for putting measures forward that no one likes. They can't stop them. Was it in book 2 that one of the tribunes got murdered, though? I think we talked about that. And like, oh, we can find a way to get rid of him. We'll shut him up. They're getting very bold after only 35 years. So the cycle goes around again. And they're threatened. Rome is threatened. But first, I wanted to mention, I don't know if you noticed this. It kind of stands out to me. Livy likes to point out omens and portents, things that happen in the heavens, weird things that happen. Did you notice this? Like you're all kind of, It says, the year was marked by ominous signs. Fires blazed in the sky. There was a violent earthquake. I love the next one. And a cow talked. There was a rumor that a cow had talked the previous year, but nobody believed it. Apparently this year we believe it. This year they did. Nor was this all. It rained lumps of meat. It's like cloudy with a chance of meatballs. It rained lumps of meat. Thousands of birds, we are told, seized and devoured the pieces in midair, while what fell to the ground lay scattered about for several days without going putrid. I feel like there was another. The cow talking is my favorite. But, if we run into it, I'll mention it. Why do you think Livy puts that in there? Is this what you expect to see in a history book? Do you read lots of history books that say, and the caterpillars were all very fuzzy that year, which was a sign that, evil was on the way? I read a lot of books that say things like that. What can we gather about Livy from the fact that he puts that in? Why did he put it in? We have no idea. If you were writing a book, why would you put something in? You're writing a history book, and you choose to put something in. Why? To explain something. Do you believe it? When you put it in your book, do you believe it? Probably. He doesn't say, they say this happened. He says it happened. Now, the cow talked last year and nobody believed it. But this year, people do believe in the cow talking. I'm going to gather that either Livy believes in this or he wants to tell us that the people at the time really believed it. Signs in the sky, lightning striking something, birds flying on the left or the right. This was a big deal to them. This is not something we do or understand because God says we don't do divination. We don't do seers and fortune tellers, and it's wrong. But they did. And you could go to Rome and say, it's raining meat in my hometown. Like, oh, I hate it when that happens. Well, it'd be not so bad if it wasn't putrid when it hit the ground and then you could just eat it. Oh, those cows, when they get to talking, nothing good happens after that. They believed it. I'm sorry, Adriana, what did you want to say? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So maybe Livy doesn't, but if it was important to the people at the time, this was important to somebody. Either Livy believes it still, And you don't know this, but by the time of Livy, people were getting a little more skeptical about this sort of thing. You know, there were few hardcore believers, but even a lot of people who were they had the office of priests, didn't really believe it. It was more like just getting a government job and doing your duty. It wasn't because you really believed in the gods. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. In which case they really believed it. So either way, somebody really believes it's raining lumps of meat and the cow's talking. It's just so random. The cow was talking. And it's made even better by, it happened last year. No one believed it, but of course they didn't. It says they consulted the Sibylline books. Do you remember? And I thought for sure this story was in Livy, and then it wasn't there. It was the third king, I'm pretty sure. And an old lady came to him, and she had a bunch of books. And she said, I'll sell them to you for this amount of money. And he said, you're crazy, old lady. I'm not spending that. And she took one of them, and she just feeds it into the fire in front of him. And she said, okay, say she started with 10. I have these 10 books. Okay, now I have these 9 books. I will sell them to you for the same price. What are you, nuts? Yeah, 8 books. I will sell them to you for the same price. Finally, he inquires what they are. They're the Sibyl's oracles. They're like the equivalent of the oracle at Delphi, only in Italy. All about Rome, all about its future. After she'd burned about half of them, he decided to pony up the money and buy the ones that weren't burnt. And they kept these in a temple, and only certain priests could consult them. Because when cows talk, or it rains meat, you need to find out what this means. And the Sibylline books would tell you, or the people who were qualified to look at them would read them and then interpret. Not everybody was allowed to look. It says, the Sibylline books were consulted, who found in them the prediction that danger threatened from a concourse of alien men who might attack the high places of the city with the shedding of blood. There was also found, amongst other things, a warning to avoid factious politics. This annoyed the tribunes, who swore that the prophecies were a fake, deliberately invented to stop the passage of the proposed law. And this is where we meet the thing I read before. A dangerous clash was imminent, and only avoided by, would you believe it, a report that the Volscians and Aequians were on the warpath again. But listen to what the tribunes have to say. This is how far we've shifted. In the Senate, a decree was promptly issued for the raising of troops. We need to sign up soldiers. The Volscians and Aequians are coming. And the consuls received instruments to assume direction, each of his own sphere of the coming operations. The tribunes loudly asserted in public that the war scare was a blind. It was a piece of play acting staged by the Senate, who had hired the Hernici to play a part in it. The liberty of the Roman people, they declared, had once been suppressed by strong measures. The open hostility of men against men. Now worse means were being employed. Barefaced trickery. War had been declared against the innocent Antiates, but the real enemy which the Senate meant to fight was the common people of Rome. The tribunes stand up and said, you know what? I don't believe the Volscians and Aequians are coming. I don't believe it at all. So Ruth and Adriana are the only ones in here who read Thucydides with me last year. Do you remember that the Greeks were sailing for Sicily? And the 2 guys stood up in Sicily, and one of them said, this is just a ploy. This other guy just wants control. He tells you the Greeks are sailing, and the Greeks aren't coming. The tribunes are saying the same thing here. I don't believe there's any danger. I think you're making it up. I think you're making it all up just so you can be in control. They were wrong. But do you think governments ever manufacture problems just to keep people under control? Would a government ever do that? Yes, a government would do that. Because we see it too many times in history. And sometimes we suspect our own government of doing it. But we can see it in history. You know, we don't have the smoking gun proof in current affairs. But we do for the past. They were not making it up. But governments do that on occasion. And the Tribunes aren't stupid. I don't think there is an enemy. We're not signing up for your war. And of course, if there is an enemy, they're in trouble if no one signs up. So Livy says this: rights and duties were forgotten. Force and what it might achieve was the only arbiter of conduct. Rights and duties were forgotten. Force and what it might achieve was the only arbiter of conduct. What we can do, that's what we will do. Force. But I thought this was interesting. Rights and duties were forgotten. Can you have rights as a citizen without any duties? What would the world look like? I only have rights. I have no responsibilities. I only have rights. Because somebody's always stepping on my toes. Somebody's always infringing on my rights. I don't like this person. I don't like that person. I don't like what they did. I don't like the fence that person is building in front of their yard. Their mailbox is too close to the curb. I have a right not to look at that. But you have responsibilities. What would it be like in a world with all duties and no rights? Can you picture that world? Yeah, it would be basically slavery. Slaves have all duty and no rights. But it's really just as bad when you go the other direction. I have only rights and no duties. I mean, I bet each of you has duties even in your own family. Things that you're expected to do. What if you said you only had rights in your family? I have a right to be left alone whenever I want. I have a right for my mom to make me a nice meal. We don't, you need both. And according to Livy, they're getting it out of whack. And which direction? The direction of rights or the direction of duties do you think they're going too far on? Talking more about their rights or more about their duties?
They don't have rights, then they don't owe the government anything. If they're slaves, then their government is just abusing their oppressing them.
Yes, but what are they calling out for more? Are they saying give us more rights or give us more duties? Rights. But when they say it's time to sign up and do your duty to go to war, no, we won't do it. And this can be a bargaining tool. I do understand. People do go on strike. I find this interesting. Rights and duties were both forgotten. People only care about force. And sometimes when I turn on the news or I read a newspaper, it's like rights and duties were forgotten. Force is the only thing that matters. What if this is also a cycle that repeats? So there was a nobleman. He's one of the patricians, and his name is Caeso Quinctius. And he is, it says, a man of action, tall and strongly built, whose physical endowments were enhanced by a distinguished record as a soldier and an orator. To the senatorial party, he was a tower of strength. And basically, he just lays down the law to the plebeians. It says, the mob scattered like a beaten enemy, while anyone who dared to cross him soon found himself creeping away the worse for wear, or with his clothes stripped from his back. He was not above roughing people up, in other words. And of course, the tribunes don't like this. You can't have patricians running amok, yelling at people and roughing them up. So they arrest Chaiso. And his friends come to beg for him. The tribune Virginius stands up and he says, you can have Chaiso or the law. You cannot have both. But why say law? It is your liberty that this man is trying to destroy. This tiger, compared with whom the Tarquins were but lambs. This guy's worse than the Tarquins. We need to get rid of him. His dad comes. His dad, whose surname is Cincinnatus. And we're going to talk about him in a little bit. But they get a witness. Do you remember this? A witness that says, the story was that this witness, Victor, had encountered a riotous party of young aristocrats. A quarrel broke out during which his elder brother, who had not yet fully recovered his health, was knocked down by a blow from Chaiso's fist. He was carried home in a fainting condition and subsequently died as a result of his injury. This Chaiso is murdering people. He's just punching the daylights out of them and they die later. Chaiso is found guilty. You always have the option to leave Rome when you're found guilty, but in his case, he had to, it's sort of like putting up bail, a certain amount. He did not appear, and his dad, Cincinnatus, had to pay the whole thing because his son did not appear. Remember this story, because we're going to visit it again, okay? Let me think if I want to. Okay. In the meantime, as if things aren't bad enough, a group of slaves takes up the capital. 2,500 butchered every man they found who refused to join them. And the patricians go to the people and say, okay, most of the time we're dealing with an enemy attacking us outside Rome. This time we have an enemy in Rome. Do you understand there are 2,500 armed guys up on the Capitol? They will come down and kill you. You have got to sign up and join the army, or we're going to die. In point of fact, however, it was precisely the political division of the country which in the present crisis was most fraught with danger. For the tribunes were so blinded with passion that they insisted that the seizure of the capital was a mere piece of play acting, got up to divert the attention of the commons from the question for political reform. You're making it up. There are no guys up on the Capitol. Can they not see them? No, it's made up. They do force them to see, and they force them to sign up, and they deal with the threat. But they call Cincinnatus back in, Chaiso's dad, and they say, Cincinnatus, we're going to elect you consul. And he says, did Virginius, the tribune, deserve less punishment than Herdonius, the slave leader? Simply because he was not in the capital? By any just account, he deserved more. Herdonius at least proclaimed himself an enemy, and that was as good as a call to arms. But this fellow told you there was nothing to fight about, and thereby robbed you of your swords and exposed you unarmed and helpless to the rabble of exiles and the fury of your own slaves. I asked the tribunes, is that what you call helping the people? To deliver them helpless and unarmed into the enemy's hands to have their throats cut? Cincinnatus was hard. He was stern. But he said, the tribunes were elected to help the people. How does it help to just have enemies attack you? To have slaves take over the capital? I asked you to read 3:20, and I asked you what Livy thinks of moral character in his day. What did you get from that paragraph? Did you find the place I wanted you to read? Did any of you find it?
It says that authority was still a guide to conduct in those days. And then he said that in his time, laws are like subjective.
Yes. In those days, authority, both religious and secular, was still a guide to conduct, and there was as yet no sign of our modern skepticism, which interprets solemn compacts, such as are embodied in an oath or a law, to suit its own convenience. Yes,
But literally, people are writing laws every chapter.
they are. They are. And so he's talking specifically about the people in this case. The people signed on to become an army, signed on as soldiers to get rid of the slaves. And then the patricians came and said, oh, we've got somebody else attacking us. I don't even remember who's attacking now, okay? We need to go out. And they're like, oh, we're done. We're not going to sign up for service. It's like, you know what? You already did. He signed you up to get rid of those slaves, and you signed up to be soldiers until you are disbanded by the consul. He hasn't disbanded you yet. You're still in. Get out there and fight. Because the patricians still held, okay, this is the law. You signed up according to the law. And one key, Addison, is the people actually did it. Like, this was an argument that won them over. Oh, shoot, I did sign up, didn't I? Rats, I guess I'm still in. I guess I got to go fight. Whereas Livy's saying at a later time, maybe they might say, I don't care. I don't care what I promised. I'm breaking my promise. I'm not going to do it. Make me. They aren't so far gone at this point that they can't be reasoned with and say, well, this is the law. You've already signed up. That's a very good point, though. They are left and right. Okay. Another binding of the law. I'm going to throw this out. What time is it? Okay, we're all right. There was a rule. At this point, I don't know that it's written down, but it's kind of an unspoken rule, that it's bad form to get elected for office over and over and over again. You know, we set limits. Our presidents can be elected 2 times because FDR was elected over and over and over again. It's like, yeah, 4 terms, 16 years is too long. And people still bandy around the idea of putting term limits in for senators and representatives. So you don't have somebody go to Washington and spend 50 years, in the Senate. But it was understood that the tribunes should be different every year. And the tribunes keep reelecting the same people. And Livy says, it was in the Senate's opinion, contrary to the national interest, that the same person, whether a tribune or anyone else, should hold office for successive terms. But in the very next sentence, it says the tribunes were reelected. And the Senate, to allow no advantage in the game to their opponents, were anxious to secure the return of Quinctius Cincinnatus to the consulship the following year. Well, if they're going to elect the same guy, we're going to elect the same guy too. Let's just have Cincinnatus come back in and be consul again. He's good. He's tough. Cincinnatus says this, can I be surprised, gentlemen, that you have little authority over the commons? Your own actions nullify it, because the commons ignore a decree of the Senate against the re-election of magistrates. Is that a reason for your wishing to do the same? It was your decree, not theirs. And to ignore one's own declared policy is, for sheer levity, worse than to fly in the face of a measure passed by someone else. You passed a law. You can't re-elect. Now the tribunes keep flouting the law. So does that give you permission to flout the law? I'm not going to be your consul again. I was consul last year. It's against the rules. This is who Cincinnatus is. We're going to talk a lot about him. Actually, we're going to veer into that right away. Because remember we were talking about what makes a Roman virtuous? And whether Aeneas was virtuous to just stab Turnus to the heart with no mercy. that sometimes Roman virtue might not look like ours. Cincinnatus, first of all, says, you obey the laws. For crying out loud, you pass the law yourself. Just because someone else does the wrong thing doesn't mean you can do the wrong thing. But as the story unfolds, oh, and by the way, remember the story about Kaiso? He got banished because he hit somebody in the face and the guy died. Do you remember the end of that story? A fresh cause of disquiet was the prosecution of Marcus Volscius on a charge of giving patently false evidence in the trial of Kaiso. It was becoming known from many sources that Volscius's brother had never appeared in public from the moment he fell ill. He had never even left his bed, but after lingering many months had died of a consumption. Throughout the period to which the witness had referred the crime, Kaiso had not been seen once in Rome. Many who served with him stated that he had been constantly with them in the lines and had never been home on leave. They convicted this guy because he punched a guy in the face in a riot and the guy died. Turns out Kaiso was never in Rome and the guy was bedridden. He never got up out of his bed after he was ill. It never happened. He was, and I don't know why he didn't. I think he was just too proud. He was like, you're going to railroad me anyway. It doesn't matter what I say. I'm not stooping to your level. I can't remember, Addison, though, if that evidence was given after he left to put the nail in the final coffin. Anyway, it was false. It was all made up. Let's throw that in there. Not that anybody today would ever manufacture false evidence. That would never happen. That always happens. So the cycle continues, and they're attacked again. They go out. The consul is surrounded. The consul's cap is under siege. The other consul is back in Rome and doesn't know what to do. And it says the situation evidently called for a dictator. And with no dissentient voice, Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus was named for the post. Now, I'm going to read a long section because this is like the biggest thing I want to highlight today. Okay. Now, I would solicit the particular attention of those numerous people who imagine that money is everything in this world and that rank and ability are inseparable from wealth. Let them observe that Cincinnatus, the one man in whom Rome reposed all her hope of survival, was at that moment working a little 3-acre farm, now known as the Quinctian Meadows, west of the Tiber, just opposite the spot where the shipyards are today. A mission from the city found him at work on his land, digging a ditch maybe or plowing. Greetings were exchanged, and he was asked, with a prayer for God's blessing on himself and his country, to put on his toga and hear the Senate's instructions. You know, the Romans wore kind of a tunic, like a little short dress, underneath the toga. And then the toga, you guys all can picture the sheet thing, you know, that you wrap around you. And that is what you wear when you are in an official capacity, when you're going to the Senate, when you're going out on public business. Cincinnatus is stripped down to his tunic. You're not going to plow the ground in a toga. That would be very annoying, and it would be in your way and fall off all the time. So he stripped down, and they said, no, put on your toga, because we are here on official business. So he wipes his hands, puts on his toga. This naturally surprised him, and asking if all were well, he told his wife Ricilia to run to their cottage and fetch his toga. The toga was brought, and wiping the grimy sweat from his hands and face, he put it on. At once the envoys from the city saluted him with congratulations as dictator, invited him to enter Rome, and informed him of the terrible danger of Minucius's army. A state vessel was waiting for him on the river, and on the bank he was welcomed by his 3 sons who had come to meet him, then by other kinsmen and friends, and finally by nearly the whole body of senators. Closely attended by all these people and preceded by his lictors. He's got lictors now. He's got the fasces, right? I can beat you with rods or chop your head off. He was then escorted to his residence through streets lined with great crowds of common folk, who, be it said, were by no means pleased to see the new dictator, as they thought his power excessive, and dreaded the way in which he was likely to use it. Cincinnatus was that guy whose son, Caeso, was banished wrongfully. Cincinnatus had to pay the fine because he ran with his dad's permission. He ran instead of being condemned. He's not a fan of the common people, and the common people are like, I wonder how he's going to use his power, because he's got all power in his hands. And then I asked you, how long can he keep the power? 6 months. He shows up. He gets together an army. There's no argument now. You will join the army. You will sign up. We will go save the consul's army. You will go. They join up. They beat the enemy. It says, do you guys familiar with passing under the yoke? Have you ever heard that phrase? Sometimes they say that. As a final confession of absolute defeat, they were forced, the enemy, to pass under the yoke. A yoke was made from 3 spears, 2 fixed upright in the ground and a third tied across them, and the Aequian soldiers were made to pass under it. You had to lean down a little bit. It was humiliating. It's humiliating. They all had to walk under this. This upside down U of spears, this doorway made of spears. Cincinnatus finally resigned after holding office for, yes, having originally accepted it for a period of 6 months. He didn't do anything except what he was called to do, rescue the consul's army. He didn't try to push legislation against the plebeians through. He came from his farm and he did his duty. And he said, I'm done now. You can have the power back. I'm going home to my farm. Now, you obviously, I'm sure, have heard of Cincinnati, Ohio. There are other Cincinnatis. Cincinnatus was one of the idols of the early Americans, especially after the Revolutionary War, because that was the ideal politician. You go and you do your duty, and then you leave the power and you go back to your farm. And the quintessential Cincinnatus, the guy who did it best, according to early America, George Washington. George Washington could have been president for life. They would have elected him over and over and over again. He probably could have made himself king if he had really wanted to. Everybody loved him. And he served, if memory serves, twice as president after the Constitution was ratified. And then he said, I'm going home to Virginia. Let somebody else be in charge for a while. I've done enough. I'm tired. I was the commander of the Continental Army, and then I served as a legislator under the Articles of Confederation, and now I've been your president. I'm done. And so we have tons of statues of George Washington, mostly in the East, as a Roman, as a Cincinnatus. So I brought a few of them. Unfortunately, because of resolution, I could only get small ones. Okay, let's do this one first. This one is in Baltimore. There is I'll pass this around so you can see it up close. This is on a Washington monument. There's a Washington monument in Baltimore. And this is on top. He is wearing a toga. He's got like a Revolutionary War uniform on, but he's got a toga over it. And he's got something out in his hand like this. It's the scroll with his commission that he was made commander of the army. And this statue is pointing towards Annapolis, Maryland. Annapolis is where he went in to turn in his command. You put me in charge of all the armed forces. We've won. I give you back my power. Then we have, this one's kind of fuzzy, okay? This is in the state capitol in Richmond, Virginia. I zoomed in a little bit because I wanted to see things. First of all, he's got a plow behind him. This is a plow blade. And he's got his walking stick. But look what he's got his arm on. It's a bundle of rods. It's the Foscase. I had this, but I'm going back to this. Give me my plow and my walking cane. Now this one, apparently, it was not made until 1832, and apparently people laughed at it a little bit. This was for the 100th anniversary of his birth. It's in the National Museum in DC, and people laughed at it because he was like, he has a bare chest. He's Roman through and through. He's wrapped in a toga. He's got the sandals on, and he's handing in his sword, and he's handing handle first. No threat here. I'm handing back my command. Apparently, the Continental Army began a society of the Cincinnatus. Men who said, we are in command now, but when there is no need for us to be in command anymore, we will give up the power. This was the ideal. And so they often refer to George Washington as the American Cincinnatus, because we value that. And this is me speculating now. I wonder if he would be appalled to see the people who have spent decades in leadership, decades being governor or a senator or a representative, because that was not the ideal. The ideal was we just common people, gifted people, you know what I mean, people who can do the job. But they would be invested with power for a time, and then they would voluntarily give it up, just like Cincinnatus did. So this is just a sprinkling of the statues that portray George Washington as a Roman, and this is why he's not just any Roman, he's Cincinnatus. Because he said, I have all the power, and I don't need it anymore. I'm going to go home and farm now. It's exactly what Cincinnatus did. His feet are long. Yes. I wonder if they're real. Said a few people kind of laughed, like, oh, that's kind of a silly looking statue. But it didn't take long before people realized what he was trying to do. He's not saying George Washington ran around dressed like that. But he's saying this is the Roman senator ideal. Okay. All right. So we started this class talking about this tribune Arsa and how he wanted to get a commission, a council together to review the laws, to write down exactly what are the powers of consuls. What can they do and what can't they do? What can we get them in trouble for if they overstep? And so the next question I asked you, they finally got somebody to say, okay, we're going to meet you halfway. We're going to get a panel of 10 guys, and they are going to work on this. But
why would they not just have like them deciding but still have the system going on? Because they gave them full power, that's going to make them.
yes, I do not know, Addison. Does everybody understand Addison's question? And so let's go to the next question. Who were the decemvirs? The decemvirs in English. Who are they? Okay. To make laws. They had all authority, but their real job was to make laws. Decem means 10, and vir means man. Decemvir just means 10 men. That's all decemvir means. It's a fancy way of saying 10 guys. Where did they send to take a look at the laws to see if they wanted to pattern them after that place? Athens. It says they were sent to Athens with instructions to take down in writing the laws of Solon and acquaint themselves with the way of life and the political institutions of other Greek communities. Those who were with me last year remember Solon, probably, the lawgiver of Athens. So, yes, so they set up a board of 10. It said, as Addison pointed out, all power who should not be subject to appeal. And how'd it go at first? Really good. It says, the leading spirit of the whole board was Appius. Now, you might remember we've already met an Appius. This is the son of that Appius who was just disgusted with the plebeians, who chewed out the rest of the Senate. This is next generation. So earlier we were talking about whether it's your character or your upbringing. I'm guessing his upbringing was very anti-plebeian. Whatever his character would have been like with a different dad, we don't know. But his family was very anti-plebeian. He was the head of the board. And it says there was a case of murder. Somebody was found found a body buried in the basement, basically. And they dealt with it immediately. We punished the guilty. It says this prompt justice was one aspect of the decemvirs' work. At the same time, they were busy with framing a code until they came up with the 10 tables, a list of laws that will be true for everyone. Consuls, patricians, plebeians, everybody. I wrote down a few of them in the back of my book. You're going to love the first one. A deformed child shall be killed. That's in table 4. Table 5, women shall have guardians even after they are adults. Table 8, no one may hold meetings in the city at night. No night meetings. Table 11, get this. Marriage between patricians and plebeians is forbidden. No! Boom. If we didn't have 2 definite classes before, we do now. You can't even intermarry. Table 12. I like this one. Anyone who makes a false claim can be brought in front of 3 judges. If they decide he has lied, he pays a large penalty. If you claim Isabella stole my clock, should not. It's right here. And then it comes out, she's just making up stories about Isabella. Isabella didn't steal anything. Now I have to pay. I'm fined a huge fine for just going to court and trash talking other people and accusing them of crimes that they never committed. Isabella would never steal my clock. Also, it's just not a very fancy clock, so I'm not sure why you'd want to. So great. They worked hard the first year. Awesome. But turns out they really felt like they weren't quite done. Right? So we would like everyone to vote for us to do this for a second year. Please vote for us for a second year. And our friend Appius, who just thinks plebeians are dirt, goes out and he's kissing babies and shaking hands and campaigning. Please, please, re-elect me for another term. It says his behavior was more like that of a candidate seeking election than a magistrate in office. He blackened the character of the nobility, sang the praises of all the most socially disreputable and insignificant candidates, hung about the forum in the company of ex-tribunes by way of advertisement to sell himself to the mob, until even his colleagues, who till then had been his most devoted adherents, could not but raise an eyebrow and wonder what it all could mean. Why is he being so nice to everybody? By the way, do you know why a candidate is called a candidate? This is free trivia for the day, because I love it. So candida means white. It is the Latin word for white. A candidate put on a pure white toga, no stripes, no trim. The people out in the forum on election day in all white togas with no trim of any sort, colored, They were the candidates. They're all dressed in white. Our candidates don't dress in white because they can if they want to. I feel like if somebody came in an all-white suit, it's like Colonel Sanders or something. Doesn't Colonel Sanders wear an all-white suit? I feel like that would be a little odd. But so you don't have to wear white anymore to be a candidate. But for them, that's why we get the word candidate. So anyway, so Appius is hanging out in his all-white toga, and he gets reelected. And then it says, from that moment, Appius threw off the mask and showed his true character. At once, even before their term of office began, he set about the task of molding his colleagues to his own pattern. Every day there were private meetings. Plans for getting into their hands absolute and irresponsible power were secretly matured. They began openly to display arrogance, to refuse interviews, to be cold and repellent in conversation. Their predecessors had limited the rods to one of their members at a time. There were 10 guys, but they only let one of them have a lictor with the rods and the axes. Now, without any preparations, all 10 of them appeared in public, attended each by his own 12 lictors. Each of the 10 guys has 12. 120 guys running around with the rods and the axes, ready to beat you with them or chop your head off. The forum was crowded with lictors. Had they been 10 kings, the menace would have been no more terrible. Moreover, the new tyrants had agreed never to upset each other's decisions, unlike the first decemvirs, who had allowed their judgments to be modified on appeal to a colleague. We're the decemvirs. Ava gives a bad decision. She's ticked somebody off, all right? And then they come to me and they say, well, we don't like her decision. Do you think that's fair? I'm like, no, that's not fair. Let's do it this way. They overrode each other. Not anymore. We will back each other up, no matter what. This is what Rome signed up for. And imagine their shock when election day came around the next year. And they'd added their 2 tables. They had 12 tables of laws. And there was no call for elections. There was nothing. No one even talked about it. It's like, we won't be electing anyone new. You got the decemvirs, and that's who you're going to have. Everybody's like, what? Aren't we supposed to vote? No. Didn't they finish their job? Didn't they do the laws? Yes. They're not going anywhere. Yeah, Addison.
So they reelected them, so they've been in power for 2 years.
And then when the third year came around, it says, if they wanted anything, they took it. Soon the rods began to be used. Men were beaten, others executed. Oh, I'm so sorry. No one ever calls me. Oh, it's the mom of another student. It's Nielsen Powell's mother. She can wait. She'll have to. I'm in the middle of a class. What event, I asked you, what event led to them being removed from office? Does anybody remember? It's very similar to a story we've already read. Yes, it's Appius again. It's this Appius. So, once upon a time, Appius saw a really pretty girl. And he wanted that girl. I know you're rolling your eyes, and rightly so. And so he hired a guy to just go up to her in the middle of the forum and say, oh, you're my slave. I found out you actually, that guy you think is your dad isn't your dad. You were kidnapped, you were a slave in my household, and you were kidnapped from my household, and you were given to your dad, who's conveniently not here, so that we can talk to him about it. He's conveniently out with the army in the field. But I know that you're my slave, so you have to come with me now. And of course, there's an uproar. And they bring it before Appius. This is all a setup. As soon as he gets the girl in this guy's house, he's going to come assault her as soon as she's safely out of her dad's house. Like, well, I don't know. Well, I guess we need to talk to her dad, but we'll send some messengers to her dad. But in the meantime, yeah, she can go with you. And everybody said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's your judgment? Yeah, and I got these guys with rods and axes here next to me. So you're going to do it. Then he tries to block the messengers from getting out of the city to go tell her dad. Her fiance is there, Icilius. He's like, what? No, no. I know who this will. No, well, we'll have to talk to her dad, but we think she's a slave. This guy can take her now. The messengers get out, though. They don't act fast enough to keep the messengers in. They go to the camp. It's only a couple miles away. It's not very far out of town. And they get there and tell them what's going on. There's an uproar in the camp, and the guy hightails it back to Rome. I don't know how long all this takes. And he gets there, and no, she's my daughter. I'm telling you, she's always been my daughter. No, we don't think so. So he's like, well, okay, let me just talk to her. Let me just have a little conversation with her before you take her away. We'll figure this out. What did he do? Do you remember? What did he do? He killed her. Hang on. Appius, if I spoke too harshly, a father's heart was to blame, and I ask your pardon. This whole business bewilders me. Let me question the nurse here in my child's presence, and then if I find I am not her father, I shall understand and be able to go more calmly. Permission was granted, and he took Virginia and her nurse over to the shops by the shrine of Cloacina, the new shops they're called today. Then he snatched a knife from the butcher, and crying, there is only one way, my child, to make you free. He stabbed her to the heart. Then looking behind him at the tribunal, Appius, he said, may the curse of this blood rest upon your head forever. Virginius then runs out to the army, and he tells them the whole story. The army who is fighting under orders from the decemvirs. And they say, forget that. We're not obeying these people anymore. That's horrendous. That's horrendous. We quit. We quit the army. We quit obeying the no, that will not. We will get our tribunes back. We will get our rights back. It's very interesting. And some people might say, well, that's because maybe it didn't really happen that way and Livy made it up because it makes a good story each time. But they got rid of the kings over the assault of a woman, then get rid of the decemvirs over the attempted assault of a woman. It's the same thing playing out again. In the meantime, also, there was a soldier named Siccius out in the army, and he was talking big about getting the rights of the tribunes back, and he was talking trash about the decemvirs. And they sent him out on a mission with a group of other guys. And tragically, he died on the mission. And they went out to recover his body. They were ambushed on the mission. So sad. Strangely, there were no enemy bodies anywhere. But there was Siccius dead, and his fellow soldiers in a ring around him, facing him. He'd been fighting them off. It was an assassination. They sent a group of guys out there with him to get rid of him, shut him up. The people came back with the body and they said, strangest thing about this ambush. He got killed and he's wounded, but they didn't take out any of the enemy. There were no enemy bodies anywhere, and everybody was arranged around him. They're not stupid. They can see exactly what happened to this guy because he had a big mouth. These two things happen, boom, boom, right? They're murdering people who say anything against the present regime. And now we have guys who just snatch free women just indiscriminately. And they demand that the tribunes be restored. It says they were going to let everybody go. It says their only harsh demand concerned the punishment of the decemvirs. Justice, they declared, required their surrender, and they threatened to burn them alive. That's what these guys deserve. Well, everyone else related to this whole affair can go. We're executing them, and we're executing them in the most painful way we can think of. One of the commissioners, they were sending back and forth, came to them, and he said something very interesting. He said, a shield is what you need, not a sword. You don't need revenge. You need rights. You've done your duty, but you've lost your rights. You need a shield. Don't use the sword. You've won. Everybody sees the evil of these men. Appius, the most savage and most hated of them all, measured the revengefulness and brutality of others by what he found in his own breast. They're going to kill me. Why does he think that? Because I'd kill them if I had the chance. Right? I love that. Measured the revengefulness and brutality of others by what he found in his own breast. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about that people who are very angry all the time tend to think other people are angry? Or if you're a particularly greedy person, you think other people are interested in your money. We project what we have in ourselves, and we think, oh, that must be the kind of person there, because it's the person I am. Appius is brutal, and he thinks he's going to be treated brutally. But there's the craziest turnaround at the end of book 3. And this, I feel like, sums up why Rome didn't die out, why we have all these 138 books left, 139 books left. And even though people broke the laws, Addison, they followed the rules. There was a procedure, and they followed it. It says what the people's verdict would be was all too obvious. Oh, they're condemning Appius, and he deserves probably execution. Appius could have no hope. Nevertheless, he called on the tribunes, and when none of them offered to stay the proceedings, he was arrested by an officer of the law, he cried out, I appeal. I want my case heard by the Senate. I want the case heard by somebody else. I want to even give my case to the people. I appeal to a higher authority. And everybody was dumbfounded. Are you kidding? You're the guy who takes away everybody's rights. And you're going to use that, the right of appeal. He goes on to say, I've done you good service. My family has been a good family for Rome. I messed up. Granted, I messed up. But are you going to throw out everything good that I and my family have ever done because I messed up? Well, Virginia's dad stood up and said, this man, Appius Claudius, is not as other men. He alone can claim no share in the beneficence of the law. He alone has no part in the mutual compact of civilized men. Turn your eyes to the tribunal where he sat, like a murderous brigand in his stronghold. Remember him there, a self-appointed tyrant in perpetuity, robbing, beating, killing, threatening us all with his bloody rods and axes, attended in his contempt for God and man by his 12 executioners called his lictors, and turning at last from rapine and murder to the lust which drove him before the eyes of the Roman people to tear a freeborn girl from her father's arms and give her to his pimp like a helpless prisoner of war. Appius was flung into jail. No one indeed raised a protest, but nevertheless there was considerable uneasiness in most people's minds. This man pulled out the appeal card. He used his right of appeal, and it is being denied him. This is a hard question, isn't it? I mean, this is a question we still even ask. Is there anybody so wicked that they don't have the right of law in our country? You know, the most disgraceful, disreputable, horrible criminals still get legal defense. We don't. I mean, like, I saw them pull the trigger. I know they're guilty. They still get a trial and legal defense. That's our right.
Who did he appeal to? Like, who would have judged him?
You know, I don't know. Because the Senate would have been on, I think, to the people, I think to the General Assembly of the people.
Was it that who was judging him right
Well, no, it was the tribunes. The tribunes were arresting him, who speak for the people technically. My husband and I watched a movie a couple nights ago with Tom Hanks. It's called Bridge of Spies. It's pretty good. It's a true story about a Russian. This was during the Cold War, and a guy was arrested as a Russian spy. And the first half of the movie was about the fact that Tom Hanks was this decent lawyer, and he felt like the guy deserved decent representation, and his family got abused. There was a drive-by shooting. People shot into his house for defending a Russian spy. He said, but everybody, that's our law. It's our law that if you're arrested for an offense, you get representation. He begged the judge not to execute him, which is what you do to traitors and spies. He said, you know what? Someday the Russians might get one of ours, and we need somebody alive to trade, which indeed happened. They traded him for an American spy who was working in Russia at the time. Anyway, that's what a lot of the movie was about, is do you give everybody the same benefit of the law? Or if they're just, you consider them horrible. And back then, Russian spy was just one of the worst things you could possibly conjure up in the 1950s and early 60s. You know, that was the worst. But it says, Virginius was adamant. Only he and his daughter were worthy objects of pity. Other men should not listen to the entreaties of those born tyrants, the Claudii, but of Virginia's kinsmen, the 3 tribunes, who held their position solely in the interest of the common people. It was the end of all hope for Appius. He refused to face trial and killed himself. But I like Livy's comment. There was considerable unrest, he says. Discontent in people's minds. I don't know how I feel about that. Everybody hates Appius, yeah. We all think he's a jerk and we think he ought to die. But once you do that to one person, are you going to do, it's going to be easier to do it to the next person. Maybe the next person isn't so disreputable. Maybe the next person just said something that somebody else didn't like. This is why, we were just talking about George Washington, this is why when they came out of the Philadelphia, house where they were writing the Constitution, and they asked Ben Franklin, what have you given us? A republic, madam, if you can keep it. If you can keep it. Because all we have is our laws, right? That Constitution is all we have. We have to follow the rules. Because if you break them for one person, you'll break them for other people. I'm going to close with this comment from Livy. He says, true moderation in the defense of political liberties is indeed a difficult thing. Pretending to want fair shares for all, every man raises himself by depressing his neighbor. Our anxiety to avoid oppression leads us to practice it ourselves. The injustice we repel, we visit it in turn upon others. as if there were no choice except either to do it or to suffer it. We try to get equal shares for all, but our anxiety to avoid oppression leads us to practice it ourselves. I am led to remember the Pilgrims on the Mayflower. They came because they were being persecuted for their religion. They did not want to worship in the Anglican Church, in the State Church of England. They thought it was wrong. And they had their own congregations. And they were thrown into prison and driven out of the country. And they came here to be free to worship. However, they came here only to be free to worship in their way. Because when other people came, who were not separatists or Puritans, they persecuted them. In their, I can't quote it, in their zeal to maintain their own rights, to avoid oppression, they started oppressing other people. These were great, heroic people, but they did a terrible thing. They forgot what it's like to be the oppressed one and the persecuted one. And it wasn't until people like Roger Williams came and said, you know, I'm going to have a place where everybody can just practice religion as they see fit. We'll talk later this year about the benefits of there being a uniform religion, you know, one church and one religion. It has great benefits. But at the time in history that we're talking about here, that wasn't so. The church had already split wide open, right? It was past the Reformation, splintered. And at that point, they just forgot, oh, I was persecuted. Maybe I shouldn't persecute other people, because maybe they believe what they're doing is as right as I believe what I'm doing is right. And it's interesting. Again, this is nothing new. 2,000 years ago, Livy was saying the same thing. You know what? Sometimes we're afraid of being oppressed, and so we persecute the other. Like, I'll get him before he can get me, sort of thing. And I think that sums up the patricians and the plebeians pretty well. Each of them says, I want to get him before he gets me. I want to get him down, pass laws to keep him down before he passes laws to keep me down. So keep that in mind as you write your summa. Do you think one side is all right and one side all wrong? Do you see the points that each side makes? It's obviously colored by the fact that we value the common people having a say in government in our country. And then finish Livy, books 4 and 5. And we will finish it up next time. And then we will start, I don't know. Oh, another war, story of a war in North Africa. And we will fast forward to about 60 years before Julius Caesar. We will fast forward over a lot of history. And I will see you in a couple of weeks, and enjoy your break. And I hope the weather stays nice so you can do whatever you want to outside.